You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hello, my little cabbages, and thanks for tuning in to Jazz Cabbage, the show all about demystifying cannabis through a culinary lens. I'm your host, Chala June, and today we are back again with part 2 of our examination into the connection between cannabis and cocktail culture. Last week, I spoke with drinks expert and certified sommelier Jamie Evans about crafting cannabis cocktails at home, the unlikely relationship between wine and weed, and so much more. If you missed it, feel free to pause now and go check it out. This week, we're delving further into the conversation with mixologist and herbalist Drew Martin, who sat down with me to chat all about the beauty of botanicals and spirits, the high art of pairing cannabis flower with cocktails, and what our understanding of alcohol education can teach us about consuming cannabis responsibly. Welcome back to Jazz Cabbage. I'm your host, Chala June, and I have the pleasure of being here with Los Angeles-based herbalist, mixologist, and entrepreneur Drew Martin. Drew, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you on.
Chala, thank you so much. So excited to be here and chat with you as always.
Yes. Is there anything that I missed in your intro that you would like to add?
I mean, I feel like that's pretty on the head.
Amazing. And to give people a bit of context, you and I first met in New York a few years ago, right before the recreational legalization had fully touched down here. And it really has been such a joy to see how successfully you've brought your eponymous pre-roll brand, Drew Martin, over from California into New York's ever-expanding market. And I've also had the distinct pleasure of dining and drinking and smoking with you and your partner Andrew on both coasts. And it's really just always such a joy, not only to see you both whenever our paths cross, but also to really support and be, a big fan of this incredible brand that you've built. And to see how it's really expanded into being one of the most prominent queer-owned brands in the cannabis space right now. So before fully diving into the conversation, I really just wanted to say thank you again for being here on the show and just for being such an integral part of my own personal cannabis community.
So sweet. And the feeling is completely mutual, to echo that we've spent so much time together, both professionally and personally, and it's always been a joy. I think we have so many overlapping beliefs and values and visions for the future of this industry and of the culinary and the spirit world as well. So it's an honor to be here and to be able to have this conversation with you.
Yes, and just this intersection of culinary and cannabis and spirits and mixology, it's one that people don't inherently think about when they think about cannabis or when they think about food. But even though it doesn't necessarily get its, I think, due in either edge of the spectrum, I think that when you bring the two together, there really is this beautiful world and this beautiful community that's created. And as I mentioned briefly in the introduction, you have a background in mixology and also herbalism, which may also seem like two different ends of a spectrum, but as someone who's familiar with your work, they really complement each other so well. You've worked with a number of iconic bars and restaurants in your career, most notably Nina Compton's award-winning Compère Lapin in New Orleans. And you really have this gift for building cocktails that always have a little twist of the unexpected. So my first question for you is, when did you first get your start behind the bar, and what did your experience as an herbalist help you really bring to the table?
Yeah, it's a fun question for me. It's, this is the heart of everything that I'm passionate about. And I think really to your point, these are massively overlapping practices. Alcohol is plant-based. Alcohol is made directly from plants, and then it's often infused or macerated with plants as well. And so from my perspective, I really started on the herbalist side. I fell in love with the botanical world. And this really happened for me during all of my 20s. I spent living nomadically around the world and saw and became enamored with this idea of practice around plants and rituals around the use of botanicals and plants, both from a recreational as well as a medical or medicinal sort of perspective. And so as I really kind of started exploring that more deeply, the social aspect of it as well became really important. And that was, I think, kind of my left turn into the cocktail space, because it was a way to harness plants again in a different form, but really kind of incorporating this ritualistic, this social, and this sensory perspective into the same thing. And so to that end, in my mind, these two are so closely related that they're often one and the same, and that the social ritual, in my mind, also becomes medicine,
When you explain it like that, it also makes so much sense as to how you ended up in cannabis as well, because it's also this incredible plant that has these recreational and medicinal properties that also really bring people together in that inherently social way. And I would love to hear you speak to how cannabis became a part of your journey.
It's interesting because in the world of herbalism and natural medicine, in that practice specifically, there's been a very strange divorce of cannabis from the inclusion in that pharmacopoeia, which I find incredibly problematic because it has such incredible inherent medicinal properties. And as I was living in New Orleans, running my own practice in plant medicine by day, seeing private clients, and then on mixology by night, what became really important and a driving factor in my practice on the herbalism side was the inclusion of cannabis in my formulations. And so most of my patients were being treated with a blend of cannabis with other botanicals. And that became, and it continues to be really a driving factor and a driving force of how I want to consider the combination of the building and elaborating on the benefits, not just of one botanical, but on another, and the inclusion of cannabis, I think fits perfectly into that. And so that really took off on my herbal practice. I wanted to take that same concept and consider botanicals both from a medicinal perspective. And so in the products that I develop and produce, the botanicals that I pair with the cannabis are very thoughtfully and specifically chosen with this philosophy, I should say, that the benefit is greater than the sum of its parts, both from a medicinal side, and then the beauty of Drew Martin is that we're able to then engage on the social ritual as well. I'm straddling the line between both medicinal and social because in my mind, and I know you know this as well, Chala, those two overlap a lot and that line becomes fuzzy, and that's the space that I think is really fun to occupy and really fun to play with.
Yes, it's two whole complete circles. It's a Venn diagram. And there is such a beauty, like you said, to being able to experience these plants in a way where they are supporting one another. Something that we speak to a lot in cannabis is this idea of the entourage effect. And we usually talk about that in terms of when you have THC, you're able to get more of the benefits because there's also CBD, CBG, CBN, these other cannabinoids in the flower. But when you think on a broader scale, when you're adding cannabis and like you do in the Drew Martin blends, this really intentionally selected cannabis with these other incredible plants like passion flower you have in some of the pre-rolls, like ginger root, like rose petals and lavender, it's really clear that they're all able to support each other in this even larger way. And what's also clear is that you, as an herbalist and also as a mixologist, have this innate understanding not only of how the blends will affect people and work together to enhance these effects, but also how they're going to taste, how the experience of smoking these pre-rolls is going to be, which is often either an afterthought or not considered at all when people are making pre-rolls and when they're just kind of stuffing whatever trim and whatever shake they can into a cone and selling those for 10, 15 bucks a pop. There really is such a beautiful intentionality behind how all of these products are crafted. And I'm curious as to what your creative process looks like, whether you're developing a cocktail or a smoke blend, and what are all the factors that you're taking into consideration?
This for me is the sweet spot. This is my artistic and creative expression. And frankly, the most fun part for me. I could leave a lot of the operations and sales and marketing behind if I could just focus on product development. That's really what drives me to come to work every day. But I think you hit the nail on the head. It's looking at the experience from a 360-degree view. And this is what drove a lot of how I developed cocktail programs in the past as well, is understanding that I'm here to develop, my goal, I should say, my aspiration is to develop an experience for people. And that's the driving force behind really everything that I've worked on doing professionally. And understanding then, looking at what the experience that I'm seeking to achieve and dissecting that layer by layer. And to your point, there is all of these herbs and cannabis are selected very intentionally for their benefits on a chemical level. I'm considering terpene profile and how those build between botanical and between cannabis. I'm looking at the active elements and components of each of the botanicals, obviously, as well as the cannabis, which has a psychoactive effect as well. But then you peel that away, and I'm looking at the sensory, and I think sensory really takes a really big seat here, because sensory is beyond just flavor. It's also mouthfeel. It's also aroma. And those things are all going to intermingle with each other in a really beautiful way that really excites me. So I want to think about how that smoke is going to sort of envelop you while you're smoking this. How can I think about the combination of lavender with passion flower and an indica strain that's really high in linalool, because I know that those are going to combine in a certain way that are going to hit the olfactive triggers for each person experiencing that. I'm concerned a lot about taste as well. Taste is a driving sensory component when you're imbibing in something and putting it physically into your mouth, obviously. So how does that taste, and how can we fiddle with and adjust how things taste? Can I move the lavender up by 5% and the passion flower down a little bit? Where do we find what that sweet spot is? We all know that lavender at an excess can taste like a bar of soap in your mouth. We also all know that passion flower in general tastes pretty gross. It's a very wet hay sort of feeling. But if you add the right amount of lavender with passion flower, you can neutralize the hay feeling, but you can also neutralize the astringency that's giving that over soaped flavor of the lavender. And so there's a theory behind it, and then there's a whole practice and a million iterations between finding the exact right spot. And I'll tell you, it was really fun as I started putting these initial, especially these core line formulations together. It was a great time to be a friend of mine, because my friends were the guinea pigs and they had to sit there through 20 variations of these minor tweaks on all of these products until we finally landed somewhere where everybody was happy, and I felt really, really proud about where they were. And that's really the driving philosophy behind a lot of my cocktail practice as well, right? It's it's looking at the theory behind it, understanding that there are all of these different sensory components at play at one time, and then being able to tweak that formulation so that you can consider and engage each of those different sensory perceptions at the same time. And ultimately then, all of this said, the thing that I find the most intriguing and beautiful is that all of these sensory experiences obviously trigger an emotional response. And that's the one thing for me that I can't control by the user. And that's the thing that excites me the most as well. I know that for me, when I taste the lavender, it reminds me very specifically of, it triggers memories, and this is the beauty of the olfactive as well, right? Is that I have triggered memories of southern France in early June and driving through lavender fields, if I'm smoking the sativa blend with ginger and lemon balm and Damiana, that for me evokes a lot of deep memories from my time traveling through Southeast Asia. It's a little bit of a nod to this cuisine. The composition of Southeast Asian cuisines was spice, sour, and sweet. And so that's just me, though. I know that for you, Chala, when you light one of these joints, they're going to trigger different memories as well. And that's a huge component to the sensory experience as well, as these different sensory cues trigger different memories and by extension then feelings within each one of us. That's the beauty of being able to create something that is a complex, beautiful sensory experience, because it dives into the next level that's going to be completely unique to the smoker or to the drinker or to the eater. And that's, I think, what's really, really, really fun as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because like you said, that's really the X factor that exists in this equation of creating a whole sensory experience, is that every single person is going to take that experience differently and form their own associations. And that's really the way that you think about it in that 360 way. That's the difference between you go get a whiskey sour at a dive bar and you go get a nice bespoke cocktail at a cocktail lounge. That's the difference between you get a bodega joint and you're smoking a beautiful Drew Martin pre-roll that you got, at a dispensary. There really is, those layers of intention shine through, and it also taps into those different memories, those different sensory experiences, like you said, from, the mouthfeel to the smell to the touch. It evokes something completely different. And I think that part of what I really work hard to do through this work in highlighting this world of cannabis is to note that not only is there a whole spectrum, but there is a high end to this spectrum as well. Like, we don't, listen, I used to smoke ditchweed. I was a ditchweed kid, like ditchweed raised me, but we are in this age of legalization and of access where, if I've grown up and I'm no longer smoking a joint of ditchweed and going to McDonald's after school, I'm actually making a beautifully crafted meal and intentionally getting things at the farmer's market. Of course, I'm going to want to indulge in cannabis that meets that layer of sophistication, that meets that layer of intentionality. And I think that's something that the Drew Martin brand as a whole does really well, is say that there is not only a space for this level of elevation, but also you don't have to get incredibly stoned if you don't want to. And that's what I love about the blends as well, is they're intentionally low dose, and you're able to really approach it at a place where you're like, I'm doing this in conjunction with my rituals and not necessarily just as a way of like disconnecting. I was talking to someone who was really mentioning that cannabis is a great way for us to connect with each other and with ourselves, but it can also be a way for us to disconnect. And what I really love about the Drew Martin products is, because there's so much intentionality behind these blends, you would have to like face the entire pack and then some to really be put in a space where you were like completely disconnected from the world around you.
Absolutely. And listen, it's not that we're against disconnecting at any point. There are many times that I need the disconnect and that I take the disconnect. And that's really a common question for me always is your tolerance just so low that you don't ever want to get really high? And the answer is no, it's not. But oftentimes we don't. And oftentimes we want to think about this from a connective experience. And if I return to this driving principle behind the creation of Drew Martin, it is about facilitating a social ritual in order to connect. And to that end, I think the perfect use case and application then is about connecting with other people. And that requires you to not go to outer space, because when you do, then you're connecting more with you're connecting more with yourself at that point, or not at all, I suppose. But in this case, with Drew Martin products specifically, it really is about dosing this at a level that you are still in the room such that you can engage with other people in what I hope is often a shinier, a little bit more sparkly way, and in a way that uses the product to facilitate maybe more conversation or deeper conversation between different people. And I think, returning to your previous point about sophistication or elevation in the cannabis product, listen, I too have smoked a lot of ditchweed, and I too have bought marijuana in bricks and literally picked apart the bricks with seeds and all. But I think that I have the privilege of access to a really beautiful plant, and to that end, for me, I think the principle there is twofold. One is for respect of the plant and the respect of all plants. It's the same with the botanicals as well, is that this is and excuse my woo, but this is something I feel very strongly and passionate about. But the plant, there's an energy force in this plant that we are called to respect. And if the plant is giving itself to us and to our consumption, I must and I need respect the plant. The second aspect to that is that when looking at the sensory experience, I must use the highest quality plant, because that informs the sensory experience. And so to that end, as you know, Chala, sourcing has been incredibly important to us, both on the cannabis side as well as the botanical side. And that means for us that we work direct with farmer, that we work with regenerative and sustainable farming practices and methods. On the cannabis cultivation as well as on the botanical cultivation, we work direct with an off-the-grid farmer who grows locally all of the herbs and botanicals for True Martin, at least the ones that I can source locally. And we work with and forge partnerships with co-ops and with really beautiful, ecologically sustainable partners on cultivation on the other side. Because if I'm looking for a true terpene profile, and if I'm looking for true chemical constituents within all of these plants that are going to yield the sensory experience that I want and are going to affect the body in the way that I want, they must be grown right. And that means not sweeping trim off the floor and putting it in there, but instead the exact opposite. And I think that's not only my mission, I think that's my responsibility as a curator and caretaker of all of these plants, to do that both selfishly for the experience of the person smoking it, but also ethically for our ecosystem and for our economies and ultimately for the planet as well. That all of these things are mandatories in my mind, both selfishly and for the greater good of the earth that we live on.
Back in a flash with more Jazz Cabbage.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. Wisconsin, the state of cheese, makes half of the nation's specialty cheese and wins more awards than any other state or country. Our heritage and traditions, master cheesemaker program, and the American propensity for innovation all put Wisconsin on the cutting edge of cheesemaking. With over 600 varieties of cheese to choose from and 5,500 national and international awards and counting, get ready to turn your refrigerator into a trophy case. Enjoying a Wisconsin cheese is basically like winning a gold medal in culinary achievement. Set your mind at cheese. When you bite into a wedge of Wisconsin Wonderful, you know it is made with the ultimate skill and passion possible. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
Welcome back, my little cabbages, to more Jazz Cabbage. That makes a ton of sense to me because, first and foremost, this is a decidedly woo-woo podcast. If you're not woo-woo, this is not the right podcast for you. But it really is. Get out. But what you're saying is so true. This is a plant that not only demands respect, but has been so disrespected for so long because of criminalization, yes, because of stigma, that we've allowed ourselves to accept subpar quality. We've allowed ourselves to really bastardize kind of the whole culture around this plant into being something where we're expecting low quality, we're expecting seeds and stems, we're expecting things to come out dry and crumbly and dirty because we haven't been able to access this high quality. We haven't had the privilege, we haven't had the access because of criminalization, because of the failed war on drugs, because of the stigma even. And so it feels so important to be doing this work and to support brands like yours that are really being so intentional on every single level and at every single layer, because cannabis is really something that, as a plant on the earth, it is our birthright to use it. And we have these systems within our bodies that are designed for us to use cannabis as well. And so why wouldn't we want to give our body the best quality stuff that's out there? I mean, it's the difference between getting, a GMO tomato and getting an heirloom sun-grown farm, regeneratively grown tomato. And yes, they're both tomatoes, they'll both feed you, but one will have this layer of nutrients and just density and beauty that you're not going to be able to get from the other one because of that intentionality, and the flavor, absolutely, and the flavor. And that's something that I'm really so passionate about drawing parallels between, as someone who has a background as a food journalist, because I know that people really want to find those products that are regeneratively grown, that are grown in these sustainable ways, and also that taste good and that are going to give them nostalgia and be like, yes, this tastes like the tomato that my grandpa pulled from his garden 5 years ago. Like you said before, that sensory memory is so important. And when we have things that are a higher quality, our senses really tap into that as well. And something that I really love about the brand too is not only do you make these incredible blends, but you do a number of incredible events and activations around the brand. And something that I really love about your events is that you do often flex your mixology muscles and create these incredible cocktails and mocktails for people to sample alongside the pre-rolls. I'm still thinking about the dinner that you did earlier this summer with Amitha and with Gotham Dispensary at Derek Adams' studio in Brooklyn. And I was so lucky to have a seat at that table, not only to experience all the amazing art and food and conversation, because there were some really brilliant people in that room, but also to be able to experience these really intentional, really bespoke cocktail pairings that you made to go alongside everything. So I'm really curious about what your process is like when you are pairing cocktails and flower together.
This is my all-time favorite thing to do, is events. And you've been to a few of them. And you've been to them on my patio in my backyard of my house. And it's ultimately not very different between a large production event and us spending time at home. And the idea is, for me, again, harkens back to the same passion that drives the development of the brand, that also drove my passion in mixology, is creating an experience for people that feels meaningful and engaging. And to that end, in my mind, as we've discussed earlier today, there's no reason that I shouldn't be able to extend that sensory beyond just the smoke. And if from my perspective, the beverage, the drink, the smoke, the food are all contributing to the sensory experience that we're having. And you can extend and expand that by stacking more of them together. And so to that end, we love a dinner party, and I love the ability to pair a beverage with a smoke, with a plate at the same time. And that's how we generally do these and execute and produce these dinner parties, is around me thinking about how all three of those can intertwine with each other to create one experience for you, for the diner. And so to that end, I start with the cannabis, selfishly, because this is a Drew Martin event. And I build everything else around that. And so if I've chosen for this incredible Derek Adams dinner that we threw in June, I started with, for each of the 5 courses, with a cannabis selection. And from there, I built out a cocktail that I felt would complement and augment the sensory and the psychoactive effects of the cannabis strain or blend. And from there, when I wrote the menu, I chose a food pairing that I believed would do the same thing. And so suddenly, as you move through each course, you're tripling the engagement of your senses, both by the food, the smell of the food, the smell of the joint, the smell of the cocktail, the texture and the mouthfeel of each of those as it hits your palate, the taste as your taste buds explode. And I want to think about, if I'm serving a filet mignon with a Cab Franc from Loire with lavender and an indica, how are all of those going to stack simultaneously to engage all of your senses? And then further, by proxy, engage those memories that they're going to trigger. And then as a further extension, by way of the THC and minor cannabinoids, engage you on this psychoactive level as well. And being able to consider all of those and add new layers of variables and complexities in what that sensory experience is just my favorite thing to do.
And it really is such a all-encompassing kind of experience, but not in an overwhelming way. Everything is so beautifully balanced. And I remember distinctly, I was lucky enough that event was like a 15-minute walk away from my apartment. And I remember just walking home and I really felt like Joseph Gordon-Levitt in that one scene in 500 Days of Summer where the music's playing and he's just walking down the street all chipper, because I felt so good beyond just the ambiance and the incredible company and just being exceptionally well fed. Like you said, the compounding effects of the drinks and the cannabis and just how that all really stacked on top of each other. I was leaving there just in a true state of bliss. So it's really incredible how these things can complement each other and really create this holistic experience. And I was talking to Jamie Evans, the herb som, about this earlier, who we absolutely love. And we were talking about how often when people are talking about cannabis and alcohol, we tend to keep them completely separate in the conversation. And reasonably, not everybody can mix the two. It's not everybody's wheelhouse, but there are so many similarities between cocktail culture and cannabis culture, and there are so many ways that cocktails and cannabis can uplift and, support one another, that they don't inherently have to be at odds in this way that we like to kind of polarize things or create these binaries. And so for people who want to safely explore both cannabis and alcohol, as many of us do, what would you say are some great ways for people to be intentional and keep themselves safe?
That's a great question. And frankly, a little bit the elephant in the room, I think, as well, in a lot of, and as most people know, my practice really dives into both of them simultaneously. Often you've been to enough dinner parties to know that there is always going to be a cocktail and a joint served together because of, and I'm sure Jamie has incredible perspective on this as well, because there's so many similarities in how we, again, are creating a social ritual by means of a sensory experience that also leans into psychoactive with both cannabis and with alcohol. The elephant in the room being that these often aren't combined because there can be potential negative effects when they come together. And for me, again, a lot of my driving force behind keeping our product low dose is really built around this as well. And we talk about you smoking Drew Martin joints with the cocktail because those two are paired in a way that is not going to put you over the edge. That if we consider these things in moderation, and we imbibe in a way that is responsible and not overdone, I see no reason that these shouldn't be combined, because they have so many similarities and they have so many social benefits and so many abilities to engender connection between people that they needn't live in opposite sides of the room. But that said, they need to be considered responsibly and intentionally in the way that you are engaging with both of them, especially when they are together. And our product is perfectly suited for that. Reflecting on this, I have to give some credit to the idea that my first true love of alcohol and spirits and wines had to, I'm sure, at least subconsciously inform some of the dosage philosophy that I have today with cannabis.
And that philosophy makes so much sense because, I mean, as with all things, we should be enjoying in moderation. We should be aware of how to responsibly enjoy. Obviously, no one should be drinking and smoking and driving, but we're all adults and we should be able to make informed decisions that feel good for us as individuals. And it would be really silly and really foolish to try to pretend that nobody drinks and smokes at the same time. That's just unfathomable. And yet there's constantly this idea that, oh, if we're in the cannabis industry and the cannabis community, we're supposed to constantly talk down about alcohol and talk about how it's all bad, it's all awful. And then on the other side, within alcohol, they're like, oh, you ignore all the rest of the stuff. And when we create these binaries, there's just so much, it's so imbalanced. And there are so many opportunities for kind of going off the deep end on both ends. And like with anything, both cannabis and alcohol have their positive lights and their negative lights. But what's really amazing is that when people are able to be intentional, like you said, to really consider how things might work together, to be responsible in that way, there can be some really gorgeous benefits that exist between the two. And it really is incredible to be able to hear you speak to your work and how so much of your journey has been exploring that overlap and exploring just how we can use these things that are available to us to just enhance our quality of life, just have a good time, genuinely enjoy ourselves and build more connection with the people around us. Because at the end of the day, life is short. And if we're not having fun, what are we really doing it for? And
let's get high and let's get drunk,
Exactly. Let's enjoy ourselves. Let's have a good time, but responsibly. And I really do love how so much of your work, it's not just like that concept which people think drives cannabis, which is like, we're going to get blasted off of the face of the earth. But it's really, we're consuming this plant with respect and with intention so that it can open us up to being able to connect with each other, to being able to connect with ourselves. And that's something that in these increasingly polarizing and strifeful times, I feel like we can all just really constantly use. So truly, thank you so much for just all of the work you do, but also especially for coming on the show, for sharing just all of your knowledge and wisdom with me. And as I get ready to wrap us up here, I'm just curious about what it is you're working on these days and where our listeners can find you.
Great question. Working on these days, I'm always interested in exploring and creating new products. So we've got a few lined up, and you'll be happy to hear specifically too for New York. Is some new products with new experiences and some new fun flavors and feelings, hopefully, that we're looking to create. New York's been so fun and so beautiful to be a part of and to be in this community and in this market, ultimately, because New Yorkers are just respond so well to New Yorkers love an experience. New Yorkers love a party.
True.
And that's been really fun and exciting. And in that same way, then I think continuing to build community in New York is definitely on my top priority list, as well as continuing to throw more of these dinners. I think that this is our charge as well to continue to grow the cannabis consumer market. And in my way, in my little corner of the world, I like to do that by creating experiences, by shedding light on the benefits as well as the fun that can be had by looking at cannabis and botanicals and alcohol and pulling those together and crossing the aisle outside of traditional cannabis culture to reaching people that maybe aren't stoners, but that can sit down at a beautiful dinner at Derek Adams' studio and be introduced to what that experience can look like and what engaging the senses and doing it in a way that's respectful of the plant and doing it in a way that is considering the different elements of the plant and respecting that is something that is selfishly so rewarding for me that I feel very lucky that I get to call that work, because it's an incredible experience for me. I feel very honored to be able to do it. And I feel very honored that I get to call that work and, potentially make some money off of it, hopefully. But what an incredible, fun, privileged position that I found myself in, that I get to do these things that I love to try to ultimately then bring more people in and educate and share more about the plants and about alcohol and about botanicals all at the same time in a way that hopefully is opening new eyes to what all of that can be combined together.
And I love that and hope that every single person who is listening gets the opportunity not only to experience the products themselves, but just the incredible world that you're able to build around them through the work that you do with your events as well. And so where can our listeners find you and keep up with your work?
Drew Martin can be found across licensed shops in the New York market as well as California. Please look for us in any OCM licensed shop in New York City and beyond, as well as our home base in Los Angeles and throughout the state of California.
And where can people find you online?
Yes, please stay in touch to hear about events that we're producing, for invitations for new products and releases. You can find us on Instagram at Drew Martin Co. If you jump onto our website at drewmartin.co, we'd love to have you jump onto our newsletter, subscribe there, please, and we will keep you updated on everything that we have in the plans, everything that's coming up, and would love to see all of you at our upcoming events.
Drew, thank you so much again for coming on to Jazz Cabbage, for sharing your wisdom, for just being the fabulous human being that you are, and for just sharing your gifts and your talents with the world, because your perspective and just what you bring into this cannabis industry is so needed and so welcomed. And it really is just such an honor to know you and to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I feel the same way. I'm delighted, honored to be here, and always happy to talk to you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Check out our show notes to learn more about our guests and other cannabis resources. Jazz Cabbage is produced by Taylor Early, H. Conley, and me, Chala June. Sound design and mixing is by Sam Gerardi. Jazz Cabbage is powered by Simplecast. Jazz Cabbage, hosted by Chala June, is a production of Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe. For more Jazz Cabbage shenanigans, find us on Instagram at JazzCabbagePod. If you want to drop me a note, you can write to the pod at jazzcabbagepodcast@gmail.com.